First off, I want to welcome everybody to Hybrid and HyFlex Teaching. We're very, very thankful you joined us today for this discussion and conversation. We have a fairly large group here today, so we'd like to be sure that we address all of your questions. So please be sure to use the chat function for any questions. And Dr. Marcellus will be keeping an eye on that. Towards the end, we may just open up the floodgates and let anybody turn on their mic at the end for any questions that haven't been done. Okay, so our objectives for today. I'll let you read them and I'll talk a little bit here. Again, if you just joined us, we are recording this session. So we all have a sense of what online learning looks like and what classroom-based learning looks like. But what does it look like when you try and mix these two? There are a number of models for doing this. Two of the most common models that we tend to see out there are called hybrid and HyFlex. And this session really hopes to explain to you the key characteristics of the two models, the differences between them, some considerations when using each of the model, and we'll also discuss just a few activities that you can implement when using either model. So here's a quick rundown of our schedule. We're trying to leave enough time for people to ask questions because it's a fairly dense topic. So a couple of things to consider in terms of the USU context specifically, and any of the schools or departments herein. We are providing information on generally accepted definitions based on literature reviews. One of the most important things here, if you are considering doing either of these models, is to talk to your department heads, your chairs, as well as the registrar in advance before implementing any of these methodologies, because they may have impacts in other areas that you may not be aware of. Also, you want to discuss with the MDL if you're here at USUS or the similar agencies at the other colleges in advance to ensure that your plans for implementation can actually occur in the classroom that you're assigned. So it takes a little bit of coordination to do all this, and we want to be sure that you are all set and everybody has been contacted and all the people who are there to support you can support you. We have some definitions here we wanted to go over to set the stage. They're synchronous and asynchronous. So when you're talking about a synchronous class, you're talking about a class that happens at the same time and at the same place. So if we're all in the classroom here at USUS and you're providing a lecture to students, that same time, that same place, it falls under synchronous. If you're doing the same time but a different place, you can also have a synchronous class going on. We have a synchronous piece going on right now, and we're all in different places. We're all here at the same time, but we're in different places. So that falls under synchronous as well. And then you have the asynchronous model, which is any time and any place. So when we post this up in YouTube for you to review later on, you can review it any time or any place, and it's a piece of asynchronous learning. So more on the terminology. There's a lot of different terminology that's thrown around out there between hybrid and blended and partially online, and people call them lots of different things, and a lot of times they're used interchangeably. But what's most important to know is that it's usually a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And the point of doing blended, hybrid, or partially online is to reduce the in-class time where you need to be face-to-face. So you're either trying to reduce class time or you're trying to deal with the face-to-face time. But like I said, a lot of people kind of use these interchangeably. So it's important when you're talking to somebody to kind of get a sense of what their definition is and how they're using the terms. Because there is no, well, some people believe there's a right and wrong, but the bigger issue is they're kind of used interchangeably to mean very similar things, though some people may have a very different thing in mind.
And when we think about HyFlex, this is a term that was coined by Brian Beatty first back in the early to mid 2000s. And his book is linked there. And I think Beth might post that in the chat for you as well. It's an open source book. You can learn all about HyFlex. But his original definition of this term actually combines the word hybrid and flexible in the sense that students will get to decide for each and every class how they want to participate. Are they going to participate either face-to-face in the classroom, or are they going to participate online? So you'll notice in HyFlex courses, there's 3 potential tracks, 2 of which are required to be considered a HyFlex in its purest definition. So the first track is that typical face-to-face synchronous class session in a classroom. Some students will participate that way. Another track that is, the second track is that students will participate fully asynchronously via the learning management system, so fully online. Those 2 are required for the purest terminology of HyFlex. But now, because technology has advanced since this term first was coined, we have Zoom and Google Meets. A third potential track is also adding in participating face-to-face class sessions, but via Zoom, just like we're doing right now. So some students would be in the classroom, others might be on Zoom, and others, if you're doing all 3 tracks, would be doing it asynchronously online in the learning management system. Dr. Beatty's term says it has to have 1 and 2. EDUCAUSE says you can have 1, 2, and 3 to be considered HyFlex. But regardless of what definition you espouse, all of them have 4 key tenets that are critical for HyFlex. The first one being what we just talked about in bold on this slide, student choice. So each and every day the class is supposed to meet, students get to choose their modality. So they choose, are they coming to the classroom or are they working online? And it is up to them each and every day. The second tenet is that you have to consider reusability. So as you are teaching in a classroom, you are capturing content that you then can place online for the students who want to work asynchronously. So think about those key lab demonstrations or lecture components that are critical for all students to have. And you can capture those pieces even in the face-to-face classroom to use asynchronously online. By the same token, you need to consider the content that is online that the students in the classroom also need access to and should be able to see and use, such as readings or online discussion board prompts. Everybody should be able to have access to those. And that leads into the third tenet, which is equivalence. So in order to do a pure HyFlex model, you have to have both tracks, either online or face-to-face, be equivalent. So regardless of the mode the student chooses from day to day, they get the same learning outcomes and the same experiences based on the modality that they've chosen. So it's equitable. And in thinking about that, make sure the content you post online is accessible so that both groups of students, whether they're face-to-face or they're online, have access to all of the content that you have. And then last is interaction. We want to make sure as you design a HyFlex class that you create one class, one cohesive experience for the students. We don't want you to feel like you're teaching an online section and a face-to-face section. We also don't want the students to feel like they're in either an online or a face-to-face section. We want it to be cohesive and coordinated so that regardless of how the student joins a particular class, they feel like they're in a class with all of the students. So you have to consider how you're going to do that so that your students who are online feel connected to the students who are in the classroom and vice versa. And as Celia's pointed out here, the difference that she sees is the ability in 1 or 3 is to ask questions and get timely answers. Certainly, if you're going to do a face-to-face class and then have students beaming in via Zoom, that timeliness is there if you have that component in play. But even if they're online, you still obviously need to build in that time to provide those responses to students who have questions, even if they aren't able to join at the exact time of the class. Like if it meets at 12 o'clock on a Monday and they can't come to that because they have other commitments, you still need to make sure you're interacting with them when they are working. And yes, it would be equitable as long as they're meeting the same learning outcomes, certainly. And we're going to talk a little bit more about more specifics of that as we go along here as well. One of the other pieces too that I think it's worth bringing up is that one of the biggest differences between, say, a blended class or a hybrid class and a high flex class is that the students have choice. So typically speaking, if you design a hybrid class, you as the instructor are designing, is this particular class session face-to-face or is it online? But in high flex, the students are choosing, right? Because there's both all the time. So that's something to think about. And it's also worth considering building up to this type of a model because it's frankly easier to create a high flex course if you're creating the artifacts along the way when you're teaching it, say, this semester, and then maybe next semester, you're ready to change it into a high flex model because now you've created and curated all of the content that you might need to do both face-to-face and online at the same time.
So some considerations about high flex in general here is, I want you to understand that high flex is hard to do up front. You have to ensure that your face-to-face is equivalent to the asynchronous online. This means that you need to think about everything you do in the face-to-face and make it an equivalent experience for the asynchronous online students. So lectures, lab activities, assignments, small group, everything you do in face-to-face needs to have an equivalent experience online in the asynchronous environment. So you need to think about yourself and what you're comfortable doing. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to about high flex think that high flex can kind of occur and be created really off the cuff. And one of the things I tell people is that high flex is something you do in iterations. It's not something you're going to build one and done. You want to think about high flex and think about doing everything online as you're developing your course so that maybe you run your face-to-face course 1 year and you start adding those elements, but before you actually offer it high flex, you've slowly built up the content in more of that blended or hybrid environment. And once you know those activities that you have in the online environment work and are equivalent, you can then offer it as a high flex. But it takes time to do this. This isn't something that you're going to do off the bat. And again, you need to think about your own comfort with the tools and the web conferencing tools, the reliability of the tech and your internet. Again, as you're developing your course, if this is the first time you're actually offering this course, it's really a great time to think about online first. So as I'm thinking about building my course, I'm thinking about it as an online course right off the start if I want to go to high flex. You also want to think about your learner characteristics and locations, their time zones. Where are they? What are they doing? You also want to think about your time. How much time do you have to develop this course in your chosen modality? It's going to be the best modality that works for you. So high flex may not be an option, but is high flex an option for the content you have is another question. I think about things like a cadaver lab. Can you do a cadaver lab online? Probably not really well. So you probably want to not think about making that particular course offered in a high flex environment. You also want to think about the available content and content updating. So what do you currently have and what do you know you're going to need to update year by year? Because an asynchronous course requires a lot of attention every year. One of the nice things too about the high flex model is that it provides you for a future pivot. So if you've developed your course and now you're offering it as a high flex, let's say you get sick, or let's say there is a snow day and you can't meet face to face. Well, all that content's already there online. So you can actually pivot your students to that content so that they can continue their learning. And finally, as you are putting together your course, you want to think about the credit hours and making sure that you don't exceed the credit hours that you have for your course. This is a balance. So what do you have the students doing? How much time are they spending within that content? How much time are they spending in lectures? That all goes into the credit hour creation. So keep these things in mind. They're really important when considering HyFlex, but they're also important to consider for any modality that you decide to use.
We know when we think about the idea of doing HyFlex, many of us will think about adding that component of a Zoom or a Google Meet to beam in some of the students who may not be able to join us because they get quarantined or whatever. So here's some considerations if you look at doing a HyFlex model with web conferencing included. So consider the fact that you have access to live video, because honestly, audio is maybe the strongest piece. You have to have a high quality, but if they can't see you and they can't see what's going on in the classroom, it's really tough to pay attention. So consider, is there a camera in the room where you're going to be teaching, or can you bring your cell phone or something that you could use to provide that video feed that the students would need? Consider, do you have a way to have access to the chat? Because that might be your easiest way for those virtual students to participate. So can you open up a separate screen that has the chat open for the students to talk to you that way? And can you monitor that while you're teaching your students in the physical classroom while some of the students are online? I always advocate for logging into the Zoom meeting on a separate device, whether it's your personal laptop or your office laptop that you bring to class, or your cell phone, so that you can see what the environment looks like from the perspective of a student. But then you also have that panel that you can keep open for chat to be able to communicate with your students that are virtual, because the biggest challenge is to include those online participants and not forget that they're there, because you're in the room with most of your students probably. And so if you have a handful of students online in your Zoom or Google Meet, you have to really be deliberate about how you're going to interact with them and to make them feel included. One way to help kind of reduce that cognitive load of things to pay attention to is to ask a colleague or a teaching assistant or even a student in the class to monitor that chat. Just if you do connect with a second device from either another student or yourself, don't join the audio conference on that device, because you'll get echo from the podium computer microphones that are there and those cameras. So be careful of that, but it's always helpful to have somebody else help you, and then they can raise their hand and say, oh, there's a question in the online group, and they can stop you, and then you can address that directly so that they feel like they're included. Consider also how you're going to handle assessment if you have some virtual students joining via web conferencing, because if you're giving out a paper test, you need to have another way to get that test to them if they're virtual, and also consider proctoring and how you're handling that if you have virtual students as well. Be very clear with your learners how they're supposed to interact, how they're supposed to ask questions, what happens if they have technical difficulties, so that everybody kind of knows what's expected. Are they supposed to email you? Are they texting you? Are they, interrupting the lecture at any time to ask a question by talking out loud? Are they using the chat? Should they use the raise hand feature? All of those classroom management pieces that we may just take for granted in a traditional classroom because we're all used to that. We actually have to think about if we have some students face-to-face in a room and others online in Zoom. And really don't underestimate the online participant inclusion, because they need to feel connected to everyone else. As a parent of a student who was fully virtual last year for high school, I can tell you the teachers who really included my son in classes, he did very well in. And in the classes where he was just watching whatever was going on in the room and the teacher didn't really know he was there or not so much. So really consider student motivation and including them in what you're doing in the room as much as possible so that they can feel connected to the session.
So some activities you can do. Well, discussions obviously are at the top of the list here, because you can actually develop discussion boards for everybody in the LMS so that that conversation continues in an environment where everybody can work together as a team, all the asynchronous learners, the face-to-face. You can actually have discussion boards that bring everybody in all together. Now, your asynchronous learners aren't going to have the benefit of actually being there to see the in-class discussion. So maybe you rotate amongst the students to summarize the discussion that happened in class. Maybe you record it and post it, but you want to get that type of rich discussion that happens in the classroom also available for those who are in the asynchronous environment. So again, have different people take notes and summarize it and post it in the discussion board. Take a video, do a recording of it, and have them post it to the discussion boards. And also, all the students should consider the homework ideas, the replies for homework, the questions about homework. You want to make sure all of those questions and answers are posted in the discussion board so that your asynchronous learners have that information. Again, the purest HyFlex model is this face-to-face piece and then asynchronous. And so we have to think about our asynchronous learners and what they may not be getting from that face-to-face environment. And your discussion board or discussion forum, depending on what you call it, is a great place to provide those extra aspects for your learners. So one of the activities that I truly appreciate that I think is underutilized is this idea of Jigsaw. And this is a great way to bring together your learners from different areas. So it's a cooperative learning strategy that enables each student of a home group, so you see all the ones there, the twos there, each of those are a home group, to specialize in one aspect of a topic. For example, one group studies the bones of the arm, and the other group studies the muscles of the arm, and so on and so forth. Then you actually mix the groups so that they bring their specific focus and knowledge to solve a common problem. And that way, each of the groups are starting to learn each of the individual tasks. And it doesn't matter whether the students are online or face-to-face or in the asynchronous environment. They're all going to come together and do this work from each of their own venues. And so it's a great activity. It allows students to kind of dive deep into something, but still get a wide range of content. And it allows your students to actually think about the other areas that they need to improve and learn. The next activity that we like is called the fishbowl activity. And in this activity, students are kind of in the blue circle there in the middle. They kind of act like a panel almost. They discuss a topic or a reading at hand. And then the students on the outside of that panel observe and reflect on the discussion. It's used really well in a discussion board area because the actual video of the students doing that discussion can be posted. And then the reflections from the students on that conversation can actually be done in the discussion board in the LMS. It can also be done as people are watching a technique happen, a procedure happen. You can put a lot of things there where there is a middle core group doing, seeing, experiencing something. And then the outer group actually has that observation, reflection, feedback piece where they come together. Again, it's something that takes time to consider in terms of how you're going to do it in the face-to-face environment and then bring in the online students. Sometimes I've seen it where the online students actually have a discussion about something or record themselves and post it. And then the students who are face-to-face or in the virtual environment do the discussion around it to kind of flip the activity. So all the interaction and all that kind of core pieces aren't always done in the face-to-face class. Activities are a great way for students to actually think about working in different areas. And one of the important things that we like to see people do is actually assign roles for group work. And so you can have a student in an asynchronous environment have a specific role as part of a work group, and they can work together to actually create different deliverables that you need them to do. But what's really important is that the roles and expectations are assigned to each student, that the students create a contract so that everybody understands what part of the group needs to do what, who is responsible for what, and also giving the opportunity for the students to self-assess themselves. It's a really, really important piece here. I'm going to post later on in the chat an example so that you can see that and take a look at it at your leisure. So activities. Another great activity to do in the HyFlex model is collaborative note-taking. And so you can actually develop a shared Google Doc and then assign different sections to specific students and groups to actually take notes on, to highlight important information about, to develop a set of questions about. You can have them do a lot of things with this collaborative note-taking prospect. It doesn't also have to be a reading. It can be watching a procedure and taking notes. It can be discussing, watching a debate and taking notes on it. But the really key piece here is that each person has a specific role to whatever the assignment is, and that each person understands what they need to do, what that role actually is, and that you have a method for them to do it as a team in this shared environment, whether it's Google Docs or something else. So one of the things, these are the basics of the slides here. One of the things we'd like for you to think about is how you can make a specific activity equivalent for online, synchronous and asynchronous, and doing that classroom-based students activities using this HyFlex model. So it's a really important piece to think about and start small again. Remember, you're not just going to develop this online asynchronous piece to your course right off the bat. It usually takes time if you're not really proficient in doing it. So don't set yourself up for trying to do everything all at once, especially if you're new to your course, you're new to teaching it in this environment. Give yourself time to build it up. And then once you have everything together in the way you want it, then you can start thinking about doing this HyFlex model. One of the big things that I want to be sure everybody's aware of is that you have ETI staff and resources here to help you think about this and work through this. So you're not alone. We have a vibrant staff willing and able to partner with you to help you support your journey into this new instructional design method. I want to let you know, if you want more of a deeper dive onto HyFlex, please email me and let me know, because we can put on another session. We have a teammate who has done a lot of HyFlex work at her previous institution. So she's extremely well-grounded in this and just a great resource for you to tap into as you're starting to think about this. And it doesn't even have to be HyFlex if you're thinking about, just developing an asynchronous portion to your class, or thinking about how can I use Zoom better in my classes. We can definitely put you in touch with her as well as the rest of the team. Again, we are a resource for everybody here at the university, no matter what time zone you're in. Everybody, I hope you have a great rest of your week. Wherever you are, I hope you have sunny skies. And again, it's eti@usis.edu. Have a great day.